Welcome to the Workbench After Hours podcast. My name is Keith, and I'm your host. This is where we talk about the firearms community, shop talk, and everyday life experiences.
So guys, welcome back to the Workbench After Hours podcast. We're actually doing the After Hours podcast where it's pretty late. We shot the earlier podcast with Chris involved, and we weren't ready to go to bed yet, so we decided to give another run at it.
Yeah, why not, right?
So,
because we're usually after we shoot the original podcast, which now we've narrowed down to around an hour, we go down to the garage and finish off whatever whiskey we've been drinking and talk about the podcast.
Yeah, and then Keith always ends up editing the podcast. We look at it as he goes through and edits, and
I've learned to do that because half the time we'd go down there and shoot the shit for a while, and then by the time Chris leaves and goes to do his schoolwork, then I'm like, crap, I got to go upstairs, got to edit, got to start uploading stuff, because it does take a long time for these podcasts to upload to YouTube just because of the length and 4K. So I'm like, I'm going to start, I know we're going to shoot this shit forever down in the garage. So why not just bring the computer down there, work behind the scenes while you and Chris are talking. I'll chime in a little bit. And hell, by the time Chris left, I had it uploaded to Buzzsprout for the audio only and just had a few edits to do on YouTube, and bam.
he had quite a few edits on this last one because we're
a little bored.
It's not, I knew what we were going to be talking about, and I probably should have done my homework, but that is just not a topic that intrigues me. So I was trying my hardest to hold on. I was white knuckling it, going, all right, I'm going to figure out something that can get me engaged in this. And I missed the mark. I couldn't find it.
So you're saying when a disaster happens, you're not going to be prepared. So you're going to be knocking on my door. Hey, Keith, you want to run an extension cord from your generator over to my house?
I did not want to say anything during the actual podcast, but my first thought was, why do I have to worry about all this when I know Keith's got everything figured out already? I can just walk over and be like, hey, Keith, can we have an extra case of water? Because I know he's got 4 or 5 downstairs. So
surprisingly, right now, I don't. So after Marie and I started dating, I kind of got out of that just because life happens and other stuff comes up. So I used to be more into prepping back when I lived in an apartment and when I first started getting into guns. And that's when I'm like, I lived in an apartment. So the laundry room area I had was just full of water, food. That's where I had like my ammo stored, a bunch of stuff. So then we moved into our old house, still prepped a little bit because obviously we needed it, like we discussed on the podcast. But now that we live in this house, we have yet to use a generator, and I don't know, I've kind of let it go, but I need to start again just because you never know the way things are going.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Because like we generally drink out of water bottles. We use the fridge because we have a filter and stuff like that, but I do need to start storing water downstairs just in case, and then switch it out. Rotate every now and then.
Well, the cycling thing that you talked about was one of the things that I'd never really thought about, but you made such a good point. Like, buy 1 extra or maybe 2 extra of something that you eat on a regular basis. Take that downstairs. Take out your oldest stock. Use that for the next time you're using a recipe or anything like that, and just keep it slowly rotating instead of having this massive pile of food down in the basement that all of a sudden, it's all about to expire. It reminds me of that Office episode where Dwight is sitting in the office and he's eating, it's literally like a gallon size can of peaches, and he's just eating it. He's just like, well, it's going to go bad. I got to get rid of it anyways. It's like, well, who the fuck wants to do that?
Nobody. So it's funny. The girl I used to date back in college, her dad wasn't a prepper, but he had a lot of stuff. His sister owned a gun shop here in town, and they were really big into prepping. They owned a bunch of land, and so they would buy pallets of like not actual MREs, but like an off-brand MRE, and they had all these boxes that were going to expire soon, and they knew that I had just gotten out of college and didn't have much money, so they're like, "Do you want these?" And I'm like, "Sure,
I guess.
And I'm like, "Well, they're getting ready to expire, within the next couple months or whatever." So I brought some to work, like,
ooh.
I worked in an office before I started traveling from an insurance job, and I thought it'd be cool to bring a couple in there. So they're the ones that they came in the package like MREs do, but they were like the heating ones. Like you put,
where you shake the packet inside the, yeah.
Yeah. And then this, you obviously smell plastic heating up.
Yeah.
It did not smell good at all.
Yep.
Was it edible? Yeah, sure. Could you eat that in an emergency scenario? Yes. Could you live off that? Probably not.
Mm-mm.
It just that smell alone of that plastic heating up stunk.
I know the exact smell you're talking about. I can't remember who gave it to us, but somebody gave us a couple of those MREs, and they were old, like really old. And we were kids. They gave them to us. We read the instructions, shake the water packet or whatever, put it in there. And these things had to have been at least 10 years old or whatever at that time when we were eating them. And we heated them up. It was a scarring experience. The taste, it just tasted like, I don't know if you've ever smelt mold.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what it tasted like. And I know the food was clean. It wasn't, it's not like there was mold in it. It was just so old. It was just, I can
Stale.
still, when I think about the memory, that smell is so, incorporated with that memory. Terrible.
Speaking of smelling mold, so one disaster area I went to was Denham Springs, Louisiana. First of all, I hate working in Louisiana just because the claims there sucked. But
why else? Because it's down south and it smells like shit the whole time.
Yeah. The one good thing about that area, it was right outside Baton Rouge, is the Cajun food. Got a lot of good Cajun food, which was awesome. But as far as...
I'm surprised, because the spice factor with you is not great.
I've come a long way. But so where I was, and the bad thing, I always get sent down there when their time of year is, it's always humid. You think mosquitoes are bad here in the Midwest. They're way worse down south.
Yeah.
And then like you have to watch where you're stepping, because I'd be standing somewhere and then all of a sudden I'm like freaking itching my pants. Like, oh shit, I'm standing on an anthill, like big, not the little small ones, the big ones. Yeah. Like their anthills are all over the place down there, and not like little, like the big ass ants, like, and they bite and they hurt. So that sucked. But there's a lot of mobile homes down south, and the company I worked for insured mobile homes at the time, so I'd have to go inspect them. Well, this area flooded, and it wasn't like a 3-foot flood or whatever. Like there were areas where the entire mobile home was completely underwater.
Wow.
And
what? So that's like 10 to 12 foot flooding?
yeah, it was stupid. And so all these mobile homes get flooded, and if you know anything about mobile homes, they are made out of particle board and the cheapest materials possible. Some people can upgrade them. They can look nice. A lot of people retire them into those down in Florida, but for the most part, generally made out of particle board and cheap materials. So once they get wet, that material's no longer good, and it swells because it holds that moisture. Well, all these mobile homes flooded, and people knew that, well, all our shit's destroyed anyway. We don't have flood insurance. They basically, after the flood happened, never opened that mobile home open again. And, it gets hot, humid down there. So there'd be mobile homes that I go into a week later. Soon as I open that door, just the stiff air and the smell,
I can't even.
Nothing. You can smell mold. This was like sitting with no air to breathe for a week in the hot summer humidity.
I would start gagging
Dude.
immediately.
As soon as people open that door, you're like, whoa. And so I had to go inside and take pictures. And I'm telling you, the floors would sink. Every time there was a joist in the floor, it sunk. And then it would be like this, the floor.
Wavy through it.
Wavy. And then there'd be ceiling fans that were just drooping like this because there was so much moisture in there. And of course, mold growing everywhere. And luckily it was the surface mold and not the black mold yet.
Did they make you guys go in and look at that?
I had to go in and take pictures just showing how bad the damage was. And I'm stupid. I should have worn at least a mask, which I never did, but
I don't think I could have ever done that.
I
would have been one whiff and I'd be
it was bad. But just seeing how much that particle board and everything swelled and
warped.
It was crazy.
That's so insane. Because you'll probably never see that in a house again unless you go.
Yeah.
You think you could see that around here in Kansas City?
There's not a whole lot of mobile homes in Kansas City.
But even still, to get that amount of moisture to warp it that bad, that's got to be
because
crazy.
That particle board is just a bunch of sawdust glued together. Whereas like an actual house has plywood or a type of sheathing as the subfloor that it'll swell like that, but nothing that drastic
to that extent.
So yeah, I mean, could I see something similar in a house? Sure, but not that drastic. Because your houses breathe a lot more than those mobile homes because you shut those things up. I mean, they're not big to begin with, so it's just a box of. It was
nasty mold.
It was terrible. And then of course, do that all day and then go back to the hotel and I'm like, man, I stink.
Take a shower. You can only wash your clothes so many times before you're like, what the hell? How long did you have to work that job for?
Every time we got deployed somewhere, it was 3 weeks.
So you had 3 weeks of hell down there, huh?
Yeah, and it's from a claims adjuster standpoint, it was easy because I didn't have to estimate for anything because flooding's not covered under your homeowner's insurance. So that was the easy part. I just had to send a denial letter. But telling people that, hey, your house and all your stuff inside's destroyed, I can't cover any of that, sucked. Because a majority of people knew already that wasn't covered, so that was fine. But then there were other people that didn't know that.
Thought it was covered.
So dealing with people, having to tell people that, hey, I know you thought you had insurance that would cover this, but you actually don't. You're not in a flood zone. Yes, it flooded, but since they weren't in a flood zone, they weren't eligible for flood insurance. And trying to tell them, hey, your homeowner's insurance specifically excludes flood. I can't cover it.
You're losing everything that you've ever had in your life.
And that's where Chris and I talked about FEMA. FEMA was down there. Again, not everybody qualifies for FEMA, or if you do, it's not enough to, purchase a new home or anything like that.
Yeah, and you said it was a loan, right?
Yeah, something you have to pay back. So that's the worst part of working those type of storms is floods, because not only are you dealing with that shit I had to walk into, but also being the bearer of bad news like that. It's just like, in 3 weeks of that straight, sucks because we don't get a day off.
That almost sucks your soul out at that point, huh?
Dude, it was like I had to drink every night because otherwise that's the only way I could stay sane. It's like,
I'll have to wake up tomorrow and deliver all this bad news all over again.
Because at least with the hurricane, you get flooding. Flooding's not covered. There's usually a water line, so anything at the water line below is not covered. But then, it'll blow off shingles, cause water damage to the ceiling and stuff. So you can at least cover the stuff above the flood line. But this particular storm had no winds. It was actually because of the way the city designed the highway. They put in these barriers with no drainage. So they had this crazy rainstorm and water had nowhere to go. And this entire side of town that was on one side of the highway, since there was no room for the water to drain, got blocked and that
Drained
whole side
into
of
that side of the hot.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And it just like anywhere from obviously residential homes to commercial businesses were just destroyed, and it was crazy. And there was a curfew there. I got down there, and I'm like, because usually when I go to a place, I'd get settled into a hotel, then I'd go to like the grocery store, buy groceries because I'm going to be there for a hot minute. And by the time I got there, got settled in, went to the grocery store. It was a Walmart because that's all they had. And they're like, "Oh, there's a curfew, 9:00. Everybody's got to go home." I'm like, "What the hell?" So I'm like, "I got to hurry." I grabbed a case of beer, some drumstick ice cream, and a frozen pizza.
Get the essentials and I'm out.
Yep. And I'm like, man. But in that scenario, they do that because there's a lot of looting that goes on
Yeah.
in those cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there were a lot of signs outside that said, "You trespass, we shoot."
Mhm.
And, because I don't know what people would take though, because most of the stuff was destroyed. And there was a neighborhood of actual houses, stick-built houses that flooded. And I'd go into this neighborhood and it'd just be lined with trash in the street. Because basically 4 feet and below, everything was destroyed. So you had to cut out, 4 feet up of your walls out, and then like all your furniture and everything like that just destroyed. So it was, I'd be walking into houses. There was one in particular that was just gutted. It's like,
and all those establishments that said, if you come on our property, we'll shoot. Those are all the people who, like we talked about in the podcast, those are the people who have actual safes in their house and everything's held clean. They're like, "You're not getting my shit.
mm-hmm.
I got my gun. I got my right. Do not come on my property."
Well, if there's anything still salvageable, yeah, that's what people are going after. And copper.
Yeah, the copper piping. I was just about to ask you about that.
Yep. A lot of stuff I get are abandoned houses that in bad areas, and there's a lot of squatters. People go in, they'll kind of watch the house for a while, know that nobody's living there, so then they'll break in, stay in there for a hot minute, and then end up taking all the copper piping out of the house. Usually in the older houses, it's open, so they take all the copper piping out of the basement. Electrical wires, because there's copper in those. They'll take the water heater, the furnace, because the heating element has copper in that, and
what? They just take it somewhere to get it all smelted down, and
they take it to a scrap yard and they get money for the weight of the copper, which isn't much. If you steal enough copper pipe, you can get enough weight out of that. But then if you steal electrical wires, they don't take the wire. Like, you have to strip off the insulation to get the actual copper wire,
which is tiny.
Yeah, and that's so much more work than what the actual salvage value is worth.
Right.
And
you could have been robbing somebody else for all the
go steal more copper pipe somewhere else. But yeah, it's crazy because it's kind of like a fire too. So if your house catches on fire, 9 times out of 10, the fire department does more damage than the fire does. Because not only is the fire department breaking out windows and doors and putting holes in your roof to vent out all the smoke and everything, but then they're wetting everything down with water. So not only, smoke damage, fire damage does only so much damage that you could generally clean a lot of it, but then they just drench everything in water, and then that's a whole different ball game.
That is essentially flood damage at that point.
Yeah. And it's in the wintertime is when it's worse because they shut off your power, they shut off your gas and everything. So after they
spray it down and then it freezes?
Yep. Everything they spray down and then the shit all freezes.
I've never, typically in movies and stuff, you see if there's a fire and the fire department comes, it's never in the butt of winter. It's never in the butt of winter. So it's like, you don't think much about it. It's like, oh yeah, there's a fire, blah, 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 they spray it down. I've never thought about what if it's 20 degrees out or 0 degrees out. You have a fire. They come spray that down. The whole house is frozen on top of the fire damage. Now everything's frozen. Never thought about that once.
Yep, and every fire I go into, it's the fire department does more damage than the fire itself. It's crazy. And if you think about it, because they'll go in there and knock down the ceiling, well, all that insulation falls down into the wet carpet, and then all that freezes. It's so nasty. Luckily, if you're walking through there and everything's frozen, it's not a big deal. But once everything starts thawing out, it's so squishy and nasty.
The movies always trick you, just like with guns, because, you know, a guy in a movie grabs a gun, boom, 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 boom. He's shooting people, you know, 30 yards away. You're just popping them at once. Same thing with I feel like with fires in movies. You see them, they come up, you just assume the whole house is burned down. They spray the whole thing down. It's then burnt down to rubble. I'm sure a lot of times it's just a fire in one part of the house. They can just spray that down, and most of the house is salvageable. But you never see that in movies. It's the whole house is burnt down. So you don't ever think about how much extra damage they're doing to a specific quadrant of the house versus, yes, I never even thought about that before.
And it sounds terrible, but my job is easier if the whole house burns down. Because if it doesn't,
please let it be burnt down.
Because if it doesn't, everything's repairable. Like, you can repair anything. It's amazing how, like, there's these companies, ServPro, ServiceMaster, that you see. You wouldn't believe what they can clean and restore. So somebody not used to it can walk into a house and be like, oh, this thing's totally destroyed. Whereas if you really look at it, it's like, is it really? Because drywall can be replaced pretty easily. And then once you take the drywall down, as long as the studs are good, you're fine. You can, and if it's less than a 1/4 inch of char on the studs, that can all be cleaned off, sealed, and then you'd have no idea there's a fire there. So it may look bad walking into it, but once you take out all the debris and clean off all the smoke, you're left with a clean slate, and it's pretty easy,
salvageable,
to clean everything. It's because a lot of people, you walk into a house with them, walk into a house with the homeowner, and they're like, oh, this thing's totaled. And I'm like, not really, because the structure, you still have really good bones. It's just mostly cosmetic stuff that we have to fix. And, you're ripping out, you're still gutting a room, but it's still structurally sound.
Right.
So a lot of people don't realize that, just because it looks like it's destroyed, it's really not.
Right. Well, if you don't have a background in it, you look at it and it looks like it's, damaged beyond repair. But if you have any sort of background in, any sort of contracting, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, all this is cosmetic. We can just kind of gut it, throw on the drywall, get the windows repaired, fix the smoke damage. We're good to go. So do you have to walk people through this process?
Yeah, a lot of the time. And fire claims are tricky, especially ones that are pretty bad, because the homeowner is obviously pretty distraught and everything. So you got to keep that in mind. And I just kind of let them kind of do this. I'm like, I'm going to walk around, because it takes a while, because I have to take measurements of every room in the house to where I put that in a computer program and sketch it out, and then estimate based off that. So I have to measure every wall, every window, every door, and sketch that into a computer program. But so I'll walk them around and kind of explain to them that, let them vent, obviously, and then be like, okay, well, here's what's going on in this room. Yeah, there's a lot of smoke damage in here, but once we remove the drywall, all the carpet, everything like that, as long as the studs are good, which they generally are, you could sandblast it if you need to, seal everything so there's no odor, and then just rebuild it back new. And
so now you don't have to find a new house. We can just rebuild this room in your house for you.
Because it is way more, it gets really expensive when there's structural damage versus, drywall is pretty cheap, insulation's cheap, depending on the flooring. The most expensive part is the structural stuff. So, there's been stuff to where I've had to tear off an entire roof, rafters and all, but everything below that was still fine. So still expensive to do the structural work up top, but the rest of the house plus the foundation is fine. And, you know, a lot of people are like distraught about it, but it's like, okay, think about this. You get to basically redesign your house and start from scratch. Like,
How you always wanted it.
right?
Yeah, you look at the missus and say, I know you've been wanting to redo this room forever. Now you get to do it.
Yeah. As long as you're fine, everything else can be replaced.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
contents, yeah, you lose. Like, if I'd hate losing everything in this office, it would suck, but it's all replaceable.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big deal. As long as we're out safe, that's all that matters.
It reminds me earlier of when we were talking on the podcast earlier about having one of those fireproof safes
Mhm.
that you can keep anywhere. As long as you have, you know, your passports, anything that's super precious to you or whatever, because they make them all different sizes, but you can find the size that matches what you need. But, you know, if there was a fire or something like that in your house and you have everything stored in one of those safes, you're really not losing everything.
Mhm.
So just be smart about that. You know, think about, what do we need to keep that we absolutely need, we can't lose. Keep it in that. You'll be good to go.
And you could still replace birth certificates, social security cards.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pain, but you can still replace those. What I keep in my safe is, so nowadays most people take pictures and they're on your phone,
Mm-hmm.
which get uploaded to a cloud. So even if your phone's destroyed, you could somehow recover those. Whereas back in the day, growing up and beyond, you know, you had the prints and film, and that was it. And if that film got destroyed,
That was it.
That was it. So in my safe, I have a bunch of old film that my mom had and my grandma had that they gave me. So I got a bunch of old film and a bunch of old pictures that, like Polaroids, that can't be replaced.
Will never be replaced.
Yeah. So instead of having those out, I have those in the safe that's fire rated for a certain amount of time just in case, because I know for a fact those can't be replaced. They need to be stored somewhere safe. Whereas everything else we have on our phone, we have on our computer, they can be recovered somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Not as big of a deal.
And I mean, I feel like this kind of goes without saying, but with that fire rated safe or whatever safe you're using, should always be in a cool, dry place as well. Because if you are holding something like Keith was just saying, film or Polaroids or whatever, you don't want humidity getting in and being able to destroy that property. So, you know, if you have a nice, cool, dry basement, probably keep it down there. Not a great idea to keep it on like an outer wing of your house. That could be, you know, if a tornado comes through, or if, you know, a huge windstorm and it knocks a tree over. You just don't want it to be exposed like that. So keep that kind of stuff down in your basement, so that way, or not even necessarily your basement, but just like a cool, dry place where you know it's not going to be affected.
If you can't find a cool, dry place, they make those dehumidifier rods that Chris is looking for.
Mhm.
And I have them both in mind to where my safes are in the garage. The temperature and humidity is always changing inside the garage. But with the dehumidifier rods, it keeps at least the humidity at a constant percentage. So that way, yeah, it may be 30 degrees in that safe or 80 degrees in that safe, but the humidity is low and it's not going to cause any damage. There's not going to be any moisture in that safe that's going to cause any rust to the firearms, any water damage to the documents that are in there. The temperature doesn't matter. It's the humidity that's going to ruin anything inside the safe. So if you can't run power to your safe to get one of those dehu rods, they make those silica packs that you can put in there. Dehu rods. Yeah, we talked about that on the last podcast. At least get the same thing that you would put in a cigar box to keep to control the humidity. Just a larger version of that would go in your safe. And that's what I had to do with my smaller one when I lived in an apartment. I had to put those in there, and it works. Speaking of tornadoes, if you're in Tornado Alley and you know the safe could get blown away by a tornado, you can anchor those down. So if you have like mine's in my garage, I could anchor it down to the slab, or if it was in your basement, you could anchor it down to the slab. So that shit's not going anywhere.
Right.
Speaking of this, when are we going to get you one? Because you got plenty of guns now. Well, not plenty. You got
2. Well, I technically have 4.
Right.
One of them, nobody could kill anybody with. It's a one.
That doesn't matter.
You can only put 122 bullet at a time, and you shot the other one, and it's gonna blow your shoulder off if you use it. So we got 2 guns that actually need to be stored in the safe.
Yeah, I would store them all in the safe. So,
if I had a safe, I'd obviously store all of them in the safe. But in terms of like, that we're having the kid, there's 2 guns that could do some damage that actually need to be stored in the safe.
So you need to get a safe.
Yeah, but why can't I just keep them locked up until Chris outgrows his safe, and then I'll...
Because I don't want to have to move Chris's safe.
No, then I have to guilt him into breaking my foot, and then he owes me that safe.
Could you imagine having to move a safe into your basement?
Fuck that.
Because, most basements have the straight downstairs. His is that, like, you go down a flight, then you got a right angle turn.
You go down half a flight, and then there's the smallest little landing. I mean, it's maybe 4x4, if that. It's an immediate right angle, straight down again.
Through a doorway.
And once you get it down to the bottom, the wall comes up on you so quick. It's so tight, it would be hard to maneuver anything around that anyway.
So you're probably like us and going to have to keep it, if you get a decent sized one, keep it in the garage.
It'd be in the garage. It'd be in the garage for sure.
Which isn't a problem. Get that. And what I'd like to do is, I think I said this on the other podcast, is instead of having the safe sitting on the concrete slab, I have it sitting on these horse stall mats, which is like an 1 or 2 inch thick rubber mat.
Okay.
So that way it kind of protects. You don't have the metal sitting on the concrete to where it can rust, scratch, or anything like that. It's on a solid surface, and then it also makes it easier to level it. I could anchor it down if I wanted to, but how much those safes weigh, I think that's a little overkill. And honestly, if somebody wants to come in and steal those safes,
good luck.
More power to them, because if you can get it out, you deserve it.
Good fucking luck.
You can't get in it, but at least you can take it away.
Nothing's going to blow that safe over. It doesn't matter how much water would get in your garage. Nothing's going to tilt that over.
I don't know about the water. I don't know how watertight the safes are.
Well, I might affect inside the safe, but I'm saying nothing's going to knock that safe over in terms of bolting it down.
It's going to take a lot.
Yeah. It's going to take filling the entire garage full of water, which is not going to happen.
So we need to get you one.
We're in Kansas, by the way.
That's going to be my next project. Aside from getting him an AR, which is my next thing to get him, is gun safe.
Look out for our next video, because the whole thing's going to be revolved around me getting an AR-15. I'm going to come with a bunch of questions so Keith can answer them, and we'll see if Chris can answer any of them. So I want to get an AR-15. We're going to knock that out of the way. But yeah, so that'll be the next thing you get me to do.
Yeah, podcast. We've already come up with the title. It's going to be like something all about the AR-15, and because he's doesn't know much about the AR-15, new gun owner, and there's a lot to the AR-15 platform, from whether you want to build your own from scratch or buy one from the factory. There's a lot of stuff involved. If you want to build one from scratch, there's so many manufacturers of parts and all this stuff out there that, I mean, you could literally spend $300 to $400 on one, all the way up to thousands and thousands of dollars.
10,000, 15,000, probably.
Yeah, and it all depends on the scope or site that you put on there too. So, I mean, it's adult Legos. The possibilities are endless. But what sucks is once you get your first one, you're gonna get a second one, because
for any of you planning on moving here in the future, vet out your neighbors, because if they are a gun nut and or own their own gun business, watch out, because you're going to be like, oh, I thought I was going to spend all this money on improving my house or maybe buying some flowers. Nope. your neighbor's going to get you hooked on guns. And the next thing you know, all you can think about is, how am I going to spend this next massive amount of money on guns?
Yep. It's a fun hobby, but it's an expensive hobby.
Yeah.
That's funny. My wife and I did a video recently on how she got comfortable with guns. And one of the things I brought up is, once you get into guns, you buy your first gun and you're excited and everything's awesome. But then your mind shifts and you start looking at other guns. And then you're like, all right, well, this one's cooler. This one shoots this caliber, or has these features that this one doesn't. And then you buy that gun. And then you're like, cool. And after you get that gun, you're already looking at your other gun, because it's a never ending thing. Because
have you not seen the comment I put on?
Yeah.
On the video.
Yep. You put the timestamp.
I timestamped and everything. He's talking about, oh, it's so much fun to get your friends into guns. And I go, I timestamped it. And I said, well, it's a huge trick. He gets you to buy a gun, and then he doesn't even take you out for a year to go shoot it.
COVID and all that stuff happened. So
it was just a joke, but it really is, because the second I bought the gun, I immediately started looking up, all right, what's a new trigger assembly that I can get that has less poundage when you're pulling on the trigger? What's the next sighting I can get? What's the laser or flashlight attachment? You just start, it's just a snowball effect. You just start going crazy.
Just wait till you get an AR, because there's a lot more attachments that can go on an AR.
I know. That's why I'm nervous.
And there's so many different sights that you can get. And once you get the one you set up, then you're like, well, I want to try this other attachment, so I might as well build another AR or anything. Like it. I think at one time I had probably 5 different ARs personally. And it's just because they're cool, and why not? And
you had 5?
Yeah. And then I decided to get married.
So I had to sell a couple.
And because we're older, we had to pay for our own wedding. So like Marie said in one of the video we did, I used to collect Mosins. I still have quite a few, but I had to sell quite a few to pay for this wedding. Luckily, with the Milsurp stuff, they've gone up in price. So that benefited me. Whereas I used to buy a Mosin for like $99. Now last year they were selling for about $400. So
yep,
nice little investment.
You haven't checked your safe recently, have you?
No.
All those Mosins are at my house.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
That's cool. You had to move the TV and everything.
I mean, it was pretty easy.
So when I do the studio tour, you'll see that over here in this corner, I actually have a Mosin crate that I refinished that was stored, that held original Mosins. What happened after World War II, they refurbished a bunch in the factory and then stored them, put them all in Cosmoline, and then put them in these crates for decades. And then they started selling those to the public. Well, I got my hands on a crate and it was in pretty rough shape. So I had to, fill in some wood spots. Trying to find the same tint of the original paint they used was impossible, because they used crappy paint and there was different shades. So I found something similar, repainted it, and then I was originally going to turn it into a coffee table, because a lot of people turn the Mosin crates into coffee tables and then put clear glass in the middle so then you could see the guns, and it looks really cool. I ended up getting too lazy and didn't do that, but
it's so badass.
Yeah. So I have a row of Mosins in there, and then I also have it set up to where I have the bayonets displayed, the ammo holsters in there, and some of the other stuff that it came with, like the oil cans and a bunch of other parts and stuff in there. So it's pretty cool. I don't open it very often because I got a TV and some other stuff set on top of it. But
yeah, I've never seen. He's never showed me inside of it.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Oh, I'll have to do that.
Nope.
Now I got a bigger TV on there. It's going to be a pain in the ass. But I have videos on YouTube, older videos showing what's in there. But yeah, there's a crate. You'll see that on the
as he's talking about the different paint, I can see he painted around. There's like some
the original markings,
original numbers that are painted on there, and he painted around that. It's just slightly different green, but It's fucking badass, man.
Mm-hmm.
It is badass.
It's cool. And nowadays you can't find these things anywhere because everybody bought up all the Mosins. They bought up the crates, so it's really hard to find.
So you got a collector's item, huh?
Mm-hmm. I bought that. I had to drive, I think, an hour and a half away to buy that from somebody. Like, it just so happened that that's back when they were popular. Everybody was like wanting to turn these crates into coffee tables, so they were hard to find. So I found one online, and I'm like, dude, I'm buying that. It was like $100, I think. I had to drive an hour and a half away to go pick it up. I haven't seen one in forever in my area, and the company I used to buy it from, buy all my Mosins from, Classic Firearms, they're online. They used to sell the crates, but they're based in South Carolina, and they were pickup only. Found one locally. I'm like, I'm going to drive that hour and a half and go get it.
Hell yeah. And now it's probably worth at least quadruple, if not.
Maybe. I don't know if it.
I think it would be, because they were so rare to get in the first place, and then
yeah, and
now
it's already refinished. And the inside, it had this wax paper that also wrapped the guns. Took all that out, and I put tewing oil, several coats of that on the inside just to help preserve the wood. So it looks really good on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty cool. I used to have it full because it holds 20. I had it full at one point, but I've sold about half of them, unfortunately.
You still have 10 in there?
Probably.
And you've never showed me any of this before. Are you kidding me?
I honestly, until now,
I thought we were friends.
Until now, I haven't realized that you've never seen in there.
I've never seen in there. Not once. And there's a bayonet laying on top of it that I
that
can't help myself to play with all the time.
That bayonet's way cooler than the ones that are in there, by the way. But the ones that are in there, the bayonets would do more damage because they're the cross style. So like the blade, instead of having like one side like that one, it has like four sides. So it's like this. So
you're really fucking somebody
up. So if you put somebody in there,
mm-hmm.
you know,
you're yanking guts out.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you twist that. Ugh. You're doing some damage.
You go in and give it a twist.
Well, especially back then, like in the.
They're not repairing that.
Prior to 1940s, when most of those Mosins were made, they didn't have the means to fix you for that.
You wouldn't have really the means, unless you got to a hospital immediately, you wouldn't really have the means to fix somebody whose guts just got twisted up by something like,
yeah,
fuck.
I mean, they're skinnier than that one, but there's basically four blades, and just you put a star pattern in somebody, and it's not good. Whereas that one's like a large knife. Sure, you could put it in there and twist. It does the same thing, but
I love that thing. It's like it feels so good in the hand when you pull it out of the sheath. It's got that nice dagger action going to it.
It's a bayonet to a Swiss K31. I had a Swiss K31, really nice shape. I never shot it, and then I sold it for the wedding. The Swiss rifles were, and still are, supposed to be the most accurate rifles.
Really?
Mm-hmm. You know how most bolt action rifle guns that you do, you kind of lift it up and then back?
Yep.
They're straight pull. So a lot of times you just pull it straight back, and that's it.
It made it more efficient.
Yeah, they were really cool. I sold it because I had it for years and never shot it, but I'm kind of regretting that.
I'm ashamed of you.
I know.
Up.
What, are you done?
No, I was just free clapping.
Most embarrassing moment, or like, what's an embarrassing story? Whether it's your childhood, your adulthood, it doesn't matter. What's something?
How many do you want? Jesus Christ.
Well, let's start with one.
All right. The one that popped in my head right when you said that, I think it's because we were talking about disc golf, but my first tournament is the first hole. I got out there earlier. I knew what hole I was playing, so I went out and practiced it a couple times before the actual tournament started. I threw 2 different shots, a forehand and a backhand. I had it down. I was like, all right, I'm going to go with the backhand. I know what I'm doing. It's my first tournament ever. I and because my last name starts with a T, I was at the. So when you go into a tournament, your card is based off your last name. So the lower you are in the alphabet, the lower you start. I was the last one on the card. Everybody else tees off. They have these great tee shots. I'm T, so I'm the last tee off. And I wind up, put everything into it, and throw it directly right into a tree. Okay, cool, whatever. Maybe I'll be able to rebound off this. Try and throw a forehand. I throw it into the left again, into more trees. Throw a backhand, into more trees. Anyways, I take a triple bogey, first tournament hole I've ever played in my entire life. And I'm playing with these guys, and they're looking at me like, who the fuck is this idiot on our card? He signed up for our division, and he can't even play. Just red in the face. I don't know.
So that's me on a normal course, like on a normal hole. That's
yeah,
me.
but this is for a tournament, and I'm playing in advance. I'm like, oh yeah, I can play in advance, blah blah, blah, which I can, but it was
not a way to start.
Not a great way to start. I just remember being that right after I teed off and I threw it straight into that tree. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, what am I doing? All right, embarrassing for you.
I used to, so I in college, like JUCO, so like sophomore year, I went to a junior college here, and I was in a jazz band, and we went down to a competition in northern Texas. And back then, I was slightly underage, and I didn't like booze, like beer at all. I liked the sissy stuff like Smirnoff Ice and stuff like that. So, but going down there, I got kind of forced into drinking beer because that's what was bought, and they're like, "This is what you got to drink." So, ended up drinking some beer. Band teachers. That's back when things were relaxed and you could drink with your band teacher, and it was cool. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm glad to see you drinking a beer." But so with that, a little bit of a lightweight, I guess. So drinking these beers, having a good time, and we decided to leave the hotel and go somewhere. I forgot where it was. We were walking somewhere, and it's in one of those big lobbies that have the big, not only big windows, but big glass doors that look like the windows, but they slide open. Well, I'm walking along, talking, having a good time, laughing, and then all of a sudden, bam, like face into a glass door. Like I was walking thinking this thing is going to just open up. Nope, that was the window. Not the door.
Were there some girls there and everything?
We were with girls, and then we were with some guys, but then everybody else in the lobby saw that. Like it was like a legit. I was walking, and all of a sudden, the window stopped me. Like it wasn't oh, I saw this coming. I had a minute to prepare.
Had to brace. It was just straight slam into the glass.
Yep, in front of a bunch of people, and to me, that was pretty embarrassing. I'm like, there was no way to play that off because it's like I thought I was drunk and I thought that was a door, but it was a window. And it was it doesn't sound embarrassing now, but back then it was
oh my gosh.
In front of a bunch of strangers and
that is a nightmare.
People, it's like, oh shit.
That is a straight nightmare.
There's no way to play that off. Like just walking, talking, and then smack. Right into a freaking window. It did not feel good.
No. And not only are you trying to play it off while everybody else is laughing, you're now thinking, all right, what do I do now? Like,
and then I was scared to walk through the door. I'm like, is this really going to open? Now, anytime I walk through those automatic doors, I'm like, wait, is this really going to open?
You hold your hand out.
I walk like this now. That was pretty embarrassing.
God.
And I was like, I don't know, 20, 19, 20.
Well,
so
I am your host, Hunter. Thank you to my guest, Keith, for being on the Workbench After Hours podcast. And
you know how bad Hunter wants to be the host. He was so mad that he was a guest for a while. He's like,
oh my goodness.
If you don't call me a co-host,
I'm at least co-host. At least co-host.
I didn't know what, when we first started out, I didn't know.
A guest? I'm on this every single time when I'm a guest.
When it first started out, I'm like, I don't know how often people are going to be on here. I don't know if you're a guest, a co-host. I don't know. I know I'm the host, but
Yeah, you're my co-host.
sure.
Or I'm your co-host. But this is the best part about being a co-host. You're co-hosting.
Isn't everybody a co-host? Now I just say I have the usual suspects back with me. Or if we have like somebody like Nathan, then they're a guest.
That's a guest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Joe, guest.
Exactly. Marie, guest.
Honorary guest? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
Me? Fucking co-host, motherfucker.
I still think you're at the guest. You got a little bit.
You're right. Chris has been on more episodes than I have.
Yes. So
Well-
yeah, you're on your way to a promotion to a co-host.
All right. You just run the podcast and we'll see what happens.
Watch it explode.
Yeah.
We'll just talk about prepping and he'll have
I
stuff
hope
to talk
it does.
about.
I hope it does explode. I want it to explode for you.
That's what she said.
Nailed it. Well, thank you guys for watching our
What are we even calling this? Our
the after hours.
you know, you have the late show, then you have the late show.
Mm-hmm. I know. That's after hours. That's
All right,
what
we'll
you're
just
saying.
do that.
So,
after.
guys, thank you so much for joining us on this Workbench After Hours podcast. It's the first one we've done. We appreciate you guys for listening and have a good night.